I would like to thank Dr. Tariq Mitri, president of the St. George University in Beirut, for asking me with Professor Urban to give this talk. This talk cannot be exhaustive. It's going to last around 30 to 40 minutes, and it will deal with the following: art and pandemics. I wanted to start by looking at this painting and see that there are 3 knights fighting 3 skeletons. And we're going to see this over and over again in today's presentation. Les trois vifs, the 3 living, fighting les trois morts, the 3 dead. Pandemics have been with us for the longest time ever, and we can go back all the time to the Antoine plague, then the plague of Justinian, and so on and so forth, all the way to HIV, and from there to COVID-19, which we are facing today. If we look at the death toll, you find that Black Death or bubonic plague actually claimed 200 million deaths. Next, smallpox, around 50 million. Spanish flu, that we're going to speak about, also around 50 million. And we will get to AIDS, 25 million. As to COVID, at the latest census, we are down to 6 million deaths. At the end of this talk, I hope to have illustrated how epidemic diseases have altered the art scene, but also I hope that I would have provided you with clues as how to detect the influence of disease on art. So when you see a piece of art, you say, oh yes, this is what the influence of disease on art is. The topic is not new. Even The Economist went ahead with this title, How the Coronavirus is Changing Arts and Entertainment in America. The Guardian actually used a pun, brush with the Black Death, how artists painted through the plague, and the conclusion was quite interesting. They concluded that the entire story of the Renaissance and Baroque periods in art is sealed inside the kingdom of the plague. So you cannot understand Renaissance and Baroque unless you understand what the plague meant to Europe. So what is a plague? A plague can mean several things. The first meaning is that any calamitous outbreak of disease. The second meaning is an epidemic or pandemic disease. And this is different from that because the calamitous outbreak can be actually localized. An epidemic is going to go from region to another region. And the third meaning is any disease secondary to contamination by Yersinia pestis. And this is what we would call the bubonic plague or black plague. So when we speak about plague, we're talking about 3 different things: about the calamitous outbreak of disease, the epidemic, and disease secondary to Yersinia pestis. The oldest art in humanity is the art of storytelling. So let's see what the story about the plague. This is a cuneiform tablet, and it relates the epic of Atrahasis in the 18th century before Christ. And let me read it to you. Give the order that Surupu disease shall break out. Let Namtar put an end to their nose straight away. Let sickness, headache, Surupu, Asaku blow into them like a storm. They gave the order, and Surupu disease did break out. So this is actually the first example of a calamitous disease. We do not know what Surupu or Asaku is, but I'm sure for any Akkadian person living in this era, this could have been as common as telling somebody ma'ak corona. So the Surupu might have been the corona of the 18th century in Mesopotamia. If you go to the Old Testament, we find that David is given 3 choices: either 3 years of famine, 3 months of fleeing from enemies, or 3 days of plague. And he chooses the third. And Samuel tells us, so the Lord sent a plague on Israel from that morning until the end of the time designated, that is 3 days, and 70,000 of the people from Dan to Beersheba died. So this is another example of a calamitous outbreak. A few centuries later, we have Thucydides writing about the history of the Peloponnesian War. And I read from Thucydides, the plague is said to have come first of all from Ethiopia, beyond Egypt, and from there it fell on Egypt and Libya, and on much of the other lands. struck the city of Athens suddenly. So this is geographic spread. In addition, one person caught the disease through caring for another, and so they died like sheep. This was the greatest cause of loss of life. And now we're talking about transmission. Transmission from one person to the other. One person caught the disease through caring for another. Those who had come through the disease had the greatest pity for the suffering and dying, since they previously had experience of it and were now feeling confident for themselves, as the disease did not attack the same person a second time, or at any rate, not fatally. So Thucydides is now speaking about a real epidemics. It has geographic spread, it is transmitted through person to person, and a person who falls ill to it has immunity. I want just to read a little bit more of Thucydides for any doctor who is with us or for any medical student who is with us. The doctors were unable to cope since they were treating the disease for the first time and in ignorance. Indeed, the more they came into contact with sufferers, the more liable they were to lose their own lives. And Thucydides ends by saying, I can give this account because I both suffered the disease myself and saw others victim of it. So this is an eyewitness account of what an epidemic is. But until now, we are not sure if this plague of Athens that Thucydides speaks about was bubonic plague or if it were smallpox. The Black Plague, the bubonic plague, the plague that is transmitted through Yersinia pestis, arrived in Europe in October 1347, when 12 ships from the Black Sea docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. And we have here a handwritten account of this docking. People gathered on the docks were met with a horrifying surprise. Most sailors aboard the ships were dead, and those still alive were gravely ill and covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. And please note that the name black boils. And Sicilian authorities ordered the fleet of death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Plague would kill almost 1/3 of the continent's population. So 1 of 3 people in Europe died as a consequence of the Black Plague. And now in our storytelling, we went from a disease, calamitous disease, to an epidemic, to the Black Plague that we're talking about. Even Ibn Khaldun speaks about the Black Plague. Ibn Khaldun lost both his parents to the Black Plague. I will read in Arabic, and for those of you who are not cognizant in Arabic, you can read the red highlighted portion. نزل في العمران شرقا وغربا في منتصف هذه المئة الثامنة الطاعون الجارف الذي تحيف الأمم وذهب بأهل الجيل وانتقص عمران الأرض بانتقاص البشر، فخربت الأمصار ودرست السبل والمعالم وخلت الديار والمنازل وضعفت الدول والقبائل. And it is very interesting that Ibn Khaldun calls it الطاعون الجارف, like having a huge river. And he says that not only people died, but also civilizations died out as a consequence of the Black Plague. But as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let's go to pictures. And the oldest pictures I was able to find is this 14th century stela of a scribe from Egypt. So this is a pharaonic scribe, and this is a stela with all hieroglyphs written on it. But if you look closer, especially for the medical student, you're going to notice that this leg actually is diseased. And the scribe has poliomyelitis, and he's holding a cane to actually help him walk. So this is already, we're talking about an epidemic of poliomyelitis in 14th century Egypt. But please beware, iconic plague images are often not what they seem. I took this from the site of the NPR. The NPR, the National Public Radio in the US, and they put this because they started by putting this picture and they published it and they described it as a couple suffering from the blisters of bubonic plague. And then a reader told them, no, that's wrong. These people are not suffering from bubonic plague, but from a biblical plague. So they corrected it and published this picture and said, okay, we are sorry. Our second attempt also is not, and then they had to correct themselves again because this was actually about leprosy. And if you look very carefully, most probably it's neither plague nor leprosy, but smallpox. So when you go on internet and you look for pictures of the plague, please make sure to be sure about what we're talking about, as iconic plague images are very often not what they see. So now let's talk about how the artists dealt with the plagues, whichever kind of plague. And this is a painting, yes, by Vincent van Gogh. Doesn't look like him, but like that him, as if he already foresaw the plague of the smoking pandemics. So the artists, we're not going to be exhaustive. I'm just going to give you a few things from here and there. Edward Munch, you know, the person that painted the Scream. He actually fell ill to Spanish flu. And this is during his illness, and you can barely see his faces. And this is as he was recovering. In 1919, just after the First World War, this is when the Spanish flu struck, and it claimed more lives than the First World War. Hans Holbein the Younger, and we'll come back and talk about him over and over again. He actually depicted the Black Plague in numerous paintings and engravings, and he died to the Black Plague at the age of 46. Joaquin Sorolla, he is a painter of the early 20th century. He had lost both parents actually to cholera at the age of 6. So he was being orphaned by cholera at the age of 6. And when he painted this painting about kids going to the sea, he entitled it Tristi Herencia, Sad Inheritance. What is so sad about these kids going to the sea? If you look closely, you can see that they have crutches and they are polio sufferers. So 2,500 years, 3,500 years after the Stella, we see the same picture over and over again about polio claiming victims. Egon Schiele. Egon Schiele was a Viennese painter, and he painted himself here with his wife, Edith Ham, and their unborn child. At the time, she was 6 months pregnant, and he envisioned his future like this: the father, the mother, and the child. But this was not to be, because Edith Ham, his wife, caught Spanish flu, and she died on the 28th of October, 1918. And this here is a drawing that Egon Schiele did of his wife on her deathbed. He went on her deathbed and he made a drawing of her. He never left the hospital because he died 3 days later on the 31st of October, 1918. So not only did artists suffer from the plague, but some of them died from the plague. Some of them lost their families from the plague. The first thing that you do when you have such a catastrophe is that you have to meet death. So let us see how death was depicted by the artists. First, it is indiscriminate. I like this painting because in a way, it summarizes all what plague is. And when I told Professor Courban that I was going to speak about epidemics or pandemics and art, he said, "Do you know about Arnold Berkling?" Because for him also, this picture embodies all what plague is. Plague is indiscriminate, and you can see it here, sitting backward on a beast. And whatever the beast does not kill, death with the scythe in its hand is actually going to maul. So death is indiscriminate. And this idea that death does not discriminate is very long-lived. This is from Camposanto in Pisa in the 15th century. It is unfortunate because this fresco was very much, it was bombed during the Second World War, so it deteriorated. But let's look at it a little bit more into details. And you can find here that you have young people playing music, talking to each other, and these people are going to be dead because death is indiscriminate. And for whoever of you who has read the Decameron or Giovanni Battista, most probably Giovanni Battista got the idea of writing the Decameron from this fresco. And here you have the angels, and you have the devils fighting for the souls of the dead. And you can find that they are very busy fighting for the souls. I mean, souls are going up, and either angels or the devils are fighting for them. And now we go back to the trope that we started with. You remember, les trois vifs, 1, 2, 3, and les trois morts, and the 3 dead. And if you look at the 3 dead, you can realize that actually these dead have not died at the same time. Okay, these dead are actually in a different stage of decomposition. And the last one here is already ballooned. And so we know that he has been dead for a few days. This trope is quite interesting because it started in India. It is a Buddhist idea, 3 men facing 3 dead. And this Buddhist idea went all the way from India to Persia, to Abbasid Arabs, and came to Europe. So when the plague hit, okay, people started speaking about the story of the 3 living and the 3 dead. And this is from an Anglo-Norman poem dating from the 14th century. And you look here on the left-hand side, you have 3 kings with their crowns, and you have the 3 dead. And if you look above, you have in Anglo-Norman written like in a comic or like in a bande dessinée what the 3 kings are saying and what the 3 dead are answering. So the kings say, I am afraid. The next king says, what do I see? The 3rd king answers, I think these are devils. And the dead say, well, I was welfare, I was what you were. But that shall you be. You're going to become like me. And the last dead person is going to tell them, for God's love, beware. So if you don't beware, you're going to end up like us. And here you have the same trope. But now you have a pope, and you can see the tiara of the pope. Oops, sorry. You have an emperor with the crown of the emperor, and you have a king with the crown of the king. And if you look at the dead, you can see that this dead has a tiara, this dead has a king of a emperor, and this has a king of a crown, the crown of a king, excuse me. So we said it is indiscriminate. This is a painting I found in 1800 of a beautiful young lady looking at a skeleton. But if you look closer, you find out that the skeleton has a label. And if you look even closer, the label reads La Belle Rosine. And then you realize that she's not actually looking at a skeleton. She's looking actually at a mirror. And this is herself seeing herself when she is dead. And we're going to see that epidemics and pandemics are going to take us from a culture of beauty to a culture of ugliness. And we'll talk about this. So this is a painting of a 23-year-old woman from Venetia, depicted beautiful as she is, and then depicted after she caught cholera. So we go from a culture of beauty to a culture of ugliness. So death is indiscriminate, but it is also overwhelming. And if you look at this painting from a manuscript, this is from a manuscript, and this is about the citizens of Tournai. And you realize that everybody here is actually working for the dead. You are either putting them in coffins, you are either carrying the coffins, you are digging the graves, you are putting the coffins in the graves. There are no mourners and there are no bystanders. People have enough on their hand just to bury the dead. This here is a wax sculpture in 1690 made by Zumbu. And if you look All these people are dead except one of them, and he is the carrier of the dead. And if you look at his nose, he has put, a handkerchief like our mask, not to smell the dead. You can see that the dead are also in different levels of decomposition. So you have those who have just died, those who have died for a while, and those who have been dead for a while, blackened. And they are also, different ages, from the newborn, or from the child to the elderly. And all of them are in a mass grave, and they are at different ages of putrefaction. Now, as I said, death is, overwhelming, to the point that you can actually use the same picture for two different pandemics. Le Petit Journal in France in 1911 used this picture to speak about the plague in Manchuria, and this picture to speak about cholera the year later. So we went, as I said, from a history of beauty to a history of ugliness. And this cannot be seen better than in the gisant and the transit. So what is a gisant? Let me quote for you. A gisant is a sculpture in a recumbent effigy. You see, they are lying down, representing the person. The typical gisant depicts the disease in eternal repose, awaiting the resurrection in prayer, or hoarding attributes of office and clothes in the formal attire of a social class or office. So you look at this. This is the gisant of Eleanor d'Aquitaine. She is reading. She wants to be resuscitated in this way. After the plague, this is what we call a transit. A transit depicts the disease as nude and shrouded, or in a state of advanced desiccation or decomposition. So this tells you people how they wanted or how they hoped to be resurrected. And this tells you about the fear of people getting to this way. And if you wanted to tell both these stories, you would put a gisant, above and a transit below. So if you look at this, you will see him in the gisant, how he wants to be remembered, and in the transit, how he fears to end up. And this is from the monument of FitzAlan, who died in 1435. So now let us talk about the plague, the real plague, the bubonic plague, the Black Plague. It is of interest to know that the name Black Plague did not actually start until the 16th century in Denmark. Before, it was called the pestilence or the Great Death or bubonic disease. So the Black Death did not happen, the name did not occur until a few hundred years later. So this plague, you have a bubon, which is like a tumor, either in the axilla, or in the inguinal area, or in the neck. And William Shakespeare in King Lear says, "Thou art a boil, a plague sore, an embossed carbuncle in my corrupted blood." And this is what it looks like. If you look at the date of this picture, this is 2012. We're not talking too long ago. Less than 10 years ago, somebody who was actually bitten by a rat actually got the Black Plague. And that's why they call it the Black Plague. So the first thing that you want to do when you get Black Plague is actually pray. And you're going to use crosses. And there are two kinds of crosses that are dedicated, or three kinds of crosses that are dedicated to the plague. Two of them will have either crosses with branches or with bubos, and I'll show you the difference, or crosses carrying a protector saint, either Saint Roch, in Arabic Marrucos, or Saint Sebastian. So this looks like any other cross in France, but if you come closer, you can see the branches, you see? And these looks like small bubu over the branch. So this is a cross that was erected after a plague epidemic. This also looks like a normal cross until you come closer. And this is a much larger bubu, and you have 4 bubus on 4 sides. And you realize this is the same reason why this cross was erected. Now, this is St. Roch. As I told you, the bubu should not be here, actually. It should be in the inguinal area, much higher. But for decency purposes, he is always shown with the bubu at mid-thigh. And there's always a dog with him, because people understood when he fell to the plague, people stayed away from him. And the only reason he was able to survive is because a dog would bring food for him every day. So when you see a saint with a bubu on his leg, accompanied by a dog, you know that he is there to actually protect people from bubonic plague. Saint Sebastian also, and you can see that these three paintings are by the same great painter, Andrea Mantegna. One is in Germany, one is in France, and the other is in Italy. And Saint Sebastian is always shown up, okay, with his body larded with arrows. Let us look a little bit better on this first Saint Sebastian. And if you look at this one, look up here in the skies, okay? We're going to look in the skies, and you can see that the Black Plague comes riding on a horse, okay? And this is to depict how people thought that Black Plague was being, was being transmitted. And they thought it was being transmitted through the miasma. The miasma is actually the vapors that arise from the ground and float in the atmosphere. Like today, they tell you put a mask. At that time, they said, okay, people that were diseased, their vapor would float into the air and then will contaminate the others. So you look at this, you tell, okay, this is Saint Sebastian. You look a little bit closer and you see the plague that has been embedded in the painting. This is another painting about the plague, and you can see it is interesting because it tells you the whole story. Back down here, people are putting, okay, the diseased in the tombs. Okay, there are no coffins because they don't have time to make coffins. One of the pallbearers here falls down, and we're going to see that he also has been actually infected by the plague, and we'll look at his neck here. If you go a little bit higher, you can see the same angel and devil fighting for the souls. And up higher here, we're going to look at Saint Sebastian, okay, asking God to protect the living. So look, let's just look at them. This is Saint Sebastian kneeling in front of God. This is the pallbearer with the bubu over on his neck, and you're going to see this over and over again. People are depicted with their neck turned to the other side and their hand elevated. Now, the first thing that you do when you get a disease or a pandemic, even corona, is to avoid the disease. In 1377, the Great Council of the Mediterranean seaport of Ragusa, which is modern Dubrovnik in Croatia, passed a law establishing a Trentino. What was the Trentino? The Trentino was a 30-day isolation period to actually prevent disease from coming into the port. Later, the Venetians said 30 days is too short, so they made it 40 days. And this is where we have the word quarantine. And I love this because you have a word that started in the 22nd century, coronavirus, with a word that started in the 14th century, quarantine. Coronavirus, quarantine. How can you avoid the disease? First, by not coming in contact with other patients. And the new scientists had this beautiful cover, and they're not touching each other. But if you think about it, where did this come from? Well, this came from here. And this is actually the creation of Adam, okay, in the Chapelle Sistine, okay, by Michelangelo. So if you look closer here, we can see that this is what it is, and this is where the new scientists got their cover. So first, no contact. You're going to tell me, but no contact is not enough. You have to put what we call PPE, personal protective equipment. And this is what somebody caring for somebody with corona nowadays looks like. Well, in the time of Black Plague, he looked like this. And this first PPE, this first personal protective equipment, was created and invented in 1619 by a physician to the French King Louis XIII. And you can see that he has gloves that are sewn to the complete cover. He has boots that are sewn into, and he has covered all his face. He even has eyeglasses here. You're going to ask, but why this beak? The beak, I'll tell you about it in a second, but also note that he has a cane to examine the patient with, because even though he has gloves, he's not going to touch the patient. And if you look here in the beak, they would put herbs, and these herbs were made to actually purify the air from the disease. So the air would go in, would go through the whole herbs, and will become purified before it gets to the doctor. This is one of a painting that I found on Instagram. I mean, I knew it from before, but it was on Instagram. It is René Magritte, The Lovers, and the person who posted it said it is a Corona safe kiss. And my very good friend Omar Gabriel took the same idea, and he made it closer to our heart with putting the Lebanese flag on it. So nowadays, anybody who sees this knows what it is. I mean, we don't need to worry about it. This is contactless payment. Nobody accepts cash anymore. You go to Starbucks, you want to pay in cash. No. You have to give your card, and your card has to have a magnetic chip. Well, this was the grandfather of the contactless payment. People would put out of their village, if the village actually had an epidemic of Black Plague, they would put a pierced rock inside each of these holes. They would have vinegar, and then they will put the goods outside. They will put the money inside. So people would come from the outside with the bread, with the milk. They will put them on the ground, and then they will take out the money out of the vinegar without touching anything. So this is the grandfather of the contactless payment. How bad will it get? In February 2020, The Economist had this cover. A year later, the world was closed because of Corona. Let's talk about remedies. I mean, the best remedy for me remains coffee. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a coffee addict. But the real remedy was actually lancing the boil. You had to open the boil surgically, open it. And you can see here, as we said, now you recognize who this guy is. These are representations of Saint Roch. And an angel is opening the boil, okay? Here we have a doctor operating on a woman. There is a patient standing in line and a younger boy with a neck boil, and they are both standing in line. And you have the devil and the angel fighting for the soul of the dead. So people were afraid of death. And they started by having memento mori. What is a memento mori? A memento mori comes from Latin, and it goes, remember that you too have to die. And if you look at this painting, okay, of 1628, you have a feather, you have a broken glass, you have an inkwell that has been turned, you have a stopped watch, you have a music, and you have a skull. And all these are here to tell you, beware, you too will have to die. The memento mori craze started before the Black Death, but it just became a real trope after the Black Death. You remember Hans Holbein the Younger? We spoke about him. We said that he died from the plague at the age of 46. One of his most famous paintings is this painting. It's called The Two Ambassadors. You have an ambassador, a secular ambassador, and here you have a religious ambassador with all the paraphernalia of power and wealth. So people would go in, look at this painting, would love the painting, and would look at this thing here in the middle, but it doesn't make sense. Leaving the room, they will look back at it from another angle, and they will see this. And I'm going to get this bigger for you, and they will see that this is a skull. So Hans Holbein the Younger, depicting all the power and all the wealth in the world, both secular and religious, put a skull in the middle to tell people, never forget that you too shall die. When you see death, you start by fearing it. And you can see here, this is death, killing people right and left, like justice, blind, and showing all the arrows. And fear is going to give rise to music sometimes. The Dies Irae started in 1200, but it really can depict the fear that people felt when Black Death hit Europe. And let me make you listen to it for a few minutes.
Dies irae, dies illa, salvet seclum infamilla. Teste David cum Sibilla.
So this is the Dies Irae as sung, by the monks. We'll have another rendition of it later. But after being afraid of death, you're going to laugh at death. And there is a lighter view of death. And this is what you see here. You see death dancing, playing music, and don't think that this is something new. If you look here, this is the church of La Ferté-le-Pierre, and on its walls we have a painting that dates from 1500. This is a fresco from 1500, and let us look at the fresco. And after we look, and I'm going to make you listen in the background to the Danse Macabre by Saint-Saëns. So we started by the Dies Irae, and you are fearing, and now we're going to dance with death. And this is the Danse Macabre. And now the dance can start. And you remember we said 3 alive and 3 dead. And this is from a fresco from 1500 on the wall of the church. If you want to know who's playing, the orchestra is playing. It's playing, it is the dead that are playing. They are playing the music, and they are inviting the emperor to dance. You have and then you have and you have these are with death. It also is going hunger. So after being afraid from death, you can dance with death. And the French have an art of making fun of everything. And I had to show you this depiction. This is an English depiction, but the music is from a song that was written, in 1908 by Aristide Briand to speak, in 1889 by Aristide Briand to speak about the cholera. And I just want you to make sure at the end to read, the pharmacists go repeating, it is coming, the thing is certain, buy us some disinfectant, sulfate, chloride. So let's see at the French rendition of
Paraît qu'on attend le choléra, la chose est positive. On ne sait pas quand il arrivera, mais on sait qu'il arrive. La
So not only you can dance with death, but you can also make fun with death. But no matter what you do, you're going to lose. And I'm getting close to the end of my presentation. I wanted to show with you that no matter what you do, death always wins at the end. This is from a painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder. It dates from 1562, and it is called The Triumph of Death. The background music for this wonderful painting, was a horrifying painter actually, is the Dies Irae, but taken from Verdi's Requiem. And you're going to see that everybody is being killed, okay, even the young people and even people playing backgammon, and you're going to see lovers awaiting for death to hit. So let's have a look at this, and let's look at the painting a little bit more detail. But we live in Lebanon, and we all know what politicians can do, and politicians can spin anything. They can even spin death. They can even spin, okay, pandemics. And this is the picture of President Emmanuel Macron with Professor Didier Raoult before the Professor Raoult actually went into disfavor. And yes, you're going to try to make the most out of a pandemic. If you look at this, this is a column in Vienna that was erected in 1692, because in 1679 Vienna was hit by the plague, and at the time the Emperor Leopold I vowed that he will actually build a mercy column if Vienna was actually safe again. So when he came back, he built this beautiful column that you can still visit in Vienna. This is a painting of Bonaparte, of Napoleon in the Middle East. He had lost all his wars in the Middle East. People said that he had killed the soldiers in his troop that were actually sick from the plague. So he asked for Antoine Jean Gros to show him with the plague victims, avec les pestiférés, with the plague victims in Jaffa. And look, he has his hand without a glove, and he's touching the bubu. And this painting was actually ordered by Napoleon the year he crowned himself emperor, and he wanted to show people that, like the kings that were the miracle-making kings, the rois thaumaturges, the kings of past that could put their hands on people and cure them, he also was an empereur thaumaturge. And you can see him here, okay, naked-handed, touching the leper. Well, Napoleon III actually did not have the same courage when the Duke of Orleans visited the sick from the cholera epidemics in 1832. He didn't touch anybody, okay? And you can see that he's not touching anybody. And unfortunately, the person who was accompanying him actually fell sick to the cholera and died. The last two slides I have are about street art. I love street art. And Banksy, who actually said that our heroes now are nurses and health workers. And you can see here that he put Batman and Superman in the litter and made a superwoman out of the nurse. This is a painting by Banksy in London. And you see that he had worked and with the girl with the pearl earring of Vermeer. And he used this alarm as an earring, and he did this. And during COVID, I don't know if it was him or somebody else, they came in and they put a mask on her. So for this, I tell you, thank you, shukran, merci. This is also from street art in France, Rue de Chaligny, where there is Marianne on one side and the street worker on the other side wearing a mask, and this gentleman walking and wearing a mask. Thank you for everybody. Thank you for being with me. And I will take and entertain any questions. Thank you very much.